Chapter 1 of Bel Ami, or The History of a Scoundrel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. Bel Ami, or The History of a Scoundrel, by Guy de Maupassant. Translator unknown. Chapter 1. Poverty. After changing his 5-franc piece, Georges Duroy left the restaurant. He twisted his moustache in military style and cast a rapid, sweeping glance upon the diners, among whom were 3 saleswomen, an untidy music teacher of uncertain age, and 2 women with their husbands. When he reached the sidewalk, he paused to consider what route he should take. It was the 28th of June, and he had only 3 francs in his pocket to last him the remainder of the month. That meant 2 dinners and no lunches, or 2 lunches and no dinners, according to choice. As he pondered upon this unpleasant state of affairs, he sauntered down Rue Notre-Dame de Lorette, preserving his military air and carriage, and rudely jostled the people upon the streets in order to clear a path for himself. He appeared to be hostile to the passers-by, and even to the houses, the entire city. Tall, well-built, fair, with blue eyes, a curled moustache, hair naturally wavy and parted in the middle, he recalled the hero of the popular romances. It was one of those sultry Parisian evenings when not a breath of air is stirring. The sewers exhaled poisonous gases, and the restaurants the disagreeable odors of cooking and of kindred smells. Porters in their shirt sleeves, astride their chairs, smoked their pipes at the carriage gates, and pedestrians strolled leisurely along, hats in hand. When Georges Duroy reached the boulevard, he halted again, undecided as to which road to choose. Finally, he turned toward the Madeleine and followed the tide of people. The large, well-patronized cafes tempted Duroy, but were he to drink only 2 glasses of beer in an evening, farewell to the meagre supper the following night. Yet he said to himself, "I will take a glass at the Américain. By Jove, I am thirsty." He glanced at men seated at the tables, men who could afford to slake their thirst, and he scowled at them. "Rascals," he muttered. If he could have caught one of them at a corner in the dark, he would have choked him without a scruple. He recalled the 2 years spent in Africa, and the manner in which he had extorted money from the Arabs. A smile hovered about his lips at the recollection of an escapade which had cost 3 men their lives, a foray which had given his 2 comrades and himself 70 fowls, 2 sheep, money, and something to laugh about for 6 months. The culprits were never found. Indeed, they were not sought for, the Arab being looked upon as the soldier's prey. But in Paris it was different. There one could not commit such deeds with impunity. He regretted that he had not remained where he was, but he had hoped to improve his condition, and for that reason he was in Paris. He passed the Vaudeville and stopped at the Café Américain, debating as to whether he should take that glass. Before deciding, he glanced at a clock. It was 9:15. He knew that when the beer was placed in front of him, he would drink it, and then what would he do at 11 o'clock? So he walked on, intending to go as far as the Madeleine and return. When he reached the Place de l'Opéra, a tall young man passed him, whose face he fancied was familiar. He followed him, repeating, "Where the deuce have I seen that fellow?" For a time he racked his brain in vain. Then suddenly he saw the same man, but not so corpulent and more youthful, attired in the uniform of a hussar. He exclaimed, "Wait, Forestier!" and hastening up to him, laid his hand upon the man's shoulder. The latter turned, looked at him and said, "What do you want, sir?" Duroy began to laugh. "Don't you remember me?" "No." "Not remember Georges Duroy of the 6th Hussars?" Forestier extended both hands. "Ah, my dear fellow, how are you?" "Very well, and how are you?" "Oh, I am not very well. I cough 6 months out of the 12 as a result of bronchitis contracted at Bougival about the time of my return to Paris 4 years ago." "But you look well." Forestier, taking his former comrade's arm, told him of his malady, of the consultations, the opinions, and the advice of the doctors, and of the difficulty of following their advice in his position. They ordered him to spend the winter in the south, but how could he? He was married and was a journalist in a responsible editorial position. I manage the political department on La Vie Francaise. I report the doings of the Senate for Le Salut, and from time to time I write for La Planète. That is what I am doing." Duroy, in surprise, glanced at him. He was very much changed. Formerly, Forestier had been thin, giddy, noisy, and always in good spirits. But 3 years of life in Paris had made another man of him. Now he was stout and serious, and his hair was gray on his temples, although he could not number more than 27 years. Forestier asked, "Where are you going?" Duroy replied, "Nowhere in particular." "Very well, will you accompany me to the Vie Francaise, where I have some proofs to correct, and afterwards take a drink with me?" "Yes, gladly." They walked along arm in arm with that familiarity which exists between schoolmates and brother officers. "What are you doing in Paris?" asked Forestier. Duroy shrugged his shoulders. "Dying of hunger, simply. When my time was up, I came hither to make my fortune, or rather to live in Paris, and for 6 months I have been employed in a railroad office at 1,500 francs a year." Forestier murmured, "That is not very much." "But what can I do?" answered Duroy. "I am alone, I know no one. I have no recommendations. The spirit is not lacking, but the means are." His companion looked at him from head to foot like a practical man who is examining a subject. Then he said in a tone of conviction: "You see, my dear fellow, all depends on assurance here. A shrewd, observing man can sometimes become a minister. You must obtrude yourself and yet not ask anything. But how is it you have not found anything better than a clerkship at the station?" Duroy replied: "I hunted everywhere and found nothing else. But I know where I can get 3,000 francs at least, as riding master at the Pèlerin school." Forestier stopped him. "Don't do it, for you can earn 10,000 francs. You will ruin your prospects at once. In your office, at least, no one knows you. You could leave it if you wish at any time, but when you are once a riding master, all will be over. You might as well be a butler in a house to which all Paris comes to dine. When you have given riding lessons to men of the world or to their sons, they will no longer consider you their equal." He paused, reflected several seconds, and then asked: "Are you a bachelor?" "Yes, though I have been smitten several times." "That makes no difference. If Cicero and Tiberius were mentioned, would you know who they were?" "Yes." "Good. No one knows any more except about a score of fools. It is not difficult to pass for being learned. The secret is not to betray your ignorance. Just maneuver, avoid the quicksands and obstacles, and the rest can be found in a dictionary." He spoke like one who understood human nature, and he smiled as the crowd passed them by. Suddenly he began to cough and stopped to allow the paroxysm to spend itself. Then he said in a discouraged tone: "Isn't it tiresome not to be able to get rid of this bronchitis? And here is midsummer. This winter I shall go to Menton. Health before everything." They reached the Boulevard Poissonniere. Behind a large glass door, an open paper was affixed. 3 people were reading it. Above the door was printed the legend "La vie française." Forestier pushed open the door and said: "Come in." Duroy entered. They ascended the stairs, passed through an antechamber in which 2 clerks greeted their comrade, and then entered a kind of waiting room. "Sit down," said Forestier. "I shall be back in 5 minutes." And he disappeared. Duroy remained where he was. From time